So today we're going to talk about the migration challenges facing enterprises. So hopefully these are things that you can relate to if you're about to embark upon a cloud journey migration, if you're in the midst of one, if you're maybe just going from a platform to platform, but specifically migrating to cloud platforms has some unique challenges. We're going to talk about this decision to bundle or unbundle your telecom into your software stack. We're going to talk about key steps to prepare for a cloud migration, how Bandwidth can help, and then considerations about adding some cool call flow enhancements with a lot of the new technologies that are coming out these days. For those of you who are familiar with us, and hopefully everybody on the call is familiar with us, but for those who aren't, we are Bandwidth. We are one of the largest communications companies in the world. We have numbers and services covering 60 countries and about 90% of the world's GDP. And the interesting thing that people are always surprised to hear is that we power 100% of the Gartner Magic Quadrant UCaaS and CCaaS providers. So we're really in a unique space in the ecosystem where if you want to use calling plans, we're fully in support of that. We're actually very agnostic, but there's a lot of reasons why you might want to bring Bandwidth directly into these platforms, and those are some of the decisions that we're going to talk about today. So Eric, I'm going to kick it over to you for a survey to get us going.
All right. Thanks very much, Lauren. And we want to ask our audience here, how far along are you in your cloud journey? Are you not started, just kind of cloud curious at this point? We picked our providers, but haven't started the migration process. We've started our migration, and finally, the last option, we moved some of our teams to the cloud, but have other platforms or departments to migrate. So we're gonna give you all a minute to give us your answers on those. Maybe bring Diane in here as well. I think you'll speak to this, Diane, but I think one of the things, as always happens with technology migrations, is maybe the perception is paces ahead of the reality a little bit in terms of what's actually happening on the ground versus how quickly people start to shift their thinking. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, spot on, right? And I would also say that, sometimes the migration process can take a long time, right? So, I like it, cloud curious, right? There's the education. And maybe you picked your provider and you've started your migration, but maybe you're only, 6 months in and it's a 2-year migration, and, and maybe you're only migrating part of your, infrastructure right to the cloud. And then there's always, definition, right? Cloud can mean different things to different people, right? So, but yeah, I think, it always takes a lot longer than I think what people are anticipating.
All right. Well, I think we've got our responses in, so I'm going to go ahead and push this out. I'll turn it back over to Lauren to talk about the results and take us through the rest of the presentation.
Great. And actually, interestingly enough, this is pretty in line with what we might expect. I'm going to kick it over to Diane here just a second. She's got a bunch of great statistics about what's happening in the industry to sort of set the stage. But, full 36% of people haven't started. And that number is sometimes much higher even in some of the polls that we do. So hopefully we're going to try to be very specific about this presentation. We're going to give a little background about what others have done, and then try to be very specific with the information that we share that will hopefully help this be a smooth process for you. So Diane, I'll kick it over to you for some market background.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. And I would just echo, right? I mean, if you looked at those numbers, there was really no overwhelming obviously the audience here is in many different stages, right? We don't have an overwhelming, set of people in one or the other. So I think that's just important to kind of recognize, right? But let me move on to, let me move. Hold on. Pushing the audience. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Just, yeah. So, our research, so for those of you who aren't familiar with Metrigy, we do a lot, we do different kinds of research, but one of the things we're really known for is our surveys, right? Our big studies that we do with enterprises on a global basis across, small, mid, large enterprises, and these are global studies. And this is one that I conducted actually earlier in the year. And we touched on a lot of topics, but I thought what was relevant here was to really understand where we are with the deployments for contact center platforms within the architecture. And roughly a third, right, are on CCaaS. Now, that doesn't mean, right, to the previous poll, that doesn't mean that they are 100% on, right? They could be, partially on, but they're moving. And it just, when you take a survey, that's how they answered it, right? So we're about a third, and that really does mesh up with what we see when we actually go out and we count the agent seats, right, where they are. And we know, right, based on that, this meshes really well that about a third are on that, right? So this is what the respondents have told us in our surveys, but also that's what we know when we count the agent seats and where they are. And then the rest tend to be, we say on-prem, but they're kind of customer owned, right? So the pink and the orange and the green, they're in different locations, but they tend to be dedicated solutions for a given company. So, okay. Let me push the next one. So, when we think about today and we think about moving to the cloud, it's really about transforming, right? This is one, there's lots of different ways that companies are going through their customer experience transformation. Moving to the cloud is one of those. But we know, right, in another study that we did, that it did show, right, that, 45%, right, they have projects underway, right? We have 14% that are completed, but, there's a lot of different projects that are underway. They're not all cloud transformation, but transformations are happening in lots of different ways within the customer experience space. And when we think about the cloud, that really falls under, when we think about transformation, and I said, that percentage is going through transformation, we really categorize them in three different ways: worker-focused transformation projects, apps, applications and channels, and then foundational. And really what we're talking about here, when we're talking about moving to the cloud and all these things, right, that Bandwidth is kind of helping spearhead, those to us are foundational projects, right? And so I really wanted to highlight three here that I think are important to the discussion that we're going to have. Is that, here 31% said they're moving off-prem into the cloud, right? So this was, that there's that movement there. So that's a big transformation project. Another one is that, 40% of, companies that are going through this transformation, they're looking to improve security, right? So security is a big piece. And then another one was just moving functions to the carrier network, things like identity verification, fraud prevention, automation pieces. So those are things we're going to touch on more as we go through the day, but those really are key areas of big transformation that a lot of companies are going through in this area. And what is the trigger, right? So why move to the cloud? What is kind of those drivers? And, the number one is that they just need more expertise than they have staff, right? So they need to offload that expertise to the cloud provider, right? They're looking for cost savings. They need more flexibility, right? They have a lot more agents that are working in remote locations or home offices, and cloud services, CCaaS really helps enable that, right? That flexibility. And then number 5 is the global expansion, right? There were some other answers here. You can see that on the bottom, but these are the top 5 kind of big areas that are moving companies to kind of a CCaaS-based solution. So at this point, I am going to turn it over. I think it's
Dan, I'll take this.
Yeah,
I'll take this. Thanks, Dan. So, we've seen the top triggers that Dan's gone through, but when faced with change, often we're just looking for a nice, simple, straightforward path to just drive down. We're looking for a simple way to get to our cloud migration. But really, is it that simple? We can have competing priorities. You're often looking at AI initiatives. You're looking at different ways you need to handle configuration. You're looking at questions around REST-org ownership. And then there's always those competing priorities that come in. What happens when your projects get deprioritized or derailed? How do you deal with those types of setbacks? So I want to get practical today and share some thoughts on sort of how our customers have made their migrations a little less painful. And I want to start with the first big question, which is around whether you want to bundle or unbundle your telecommunications. So for many of the major players, across the UCaaS and CCaaS space, you kind of have two main options you can go with. You can either go with the bundled telecom, this is your all-in-one model, or you have that unbundled telecom approach, often referred to as BYOC or bring your own carrier. Lauren mentioned earlier on, which is a surprise for a lot of customers, that as Bandwidth, we are platform agnostic and we power major platforms from a UCaaS and CCaaS perspective. So why do customers go for bundled versus unbundled? So, the primary reasons behind bundled are that it's simple. The out-of-the-box plans are pretty straightforward. You just simply buy a license, make sure it has calling plans for your users, and you get one point of contact, one bill, and typically a single flat fee, which is, your all-in seat price. Nice and simple. If that works for your business, that works for Bandwidth as well. And, as I mentioned, we power a number of those calling plans. But those large CCaaS and UCaaS platforms have recognized that, enterprises have complex environments and they often need the ability to be able to choose their own carrier. As they increase in size, they have multiple office locations, globally distributed, high volume contact centers, which are really complicated to deal with. There's a lot that you can achieve by bringing your own carrier into the mix. And that's why a number of these platforms that have launched their own BYOC programs. So we'll talk about what are the benefits of unbundling your telecoms. So this kind of, as we're talking to our enterprise clients and they're going through, the great cloud migrations, there's four things that I want to highlight. The first is around better migrations. You have flexible scheduling, which allows you to have rollback options. It's not just flicking the switch and moving from, on-prem to cloud. And Lauren's going to talk in a bit more detail around what are some of those options that are available to you there. You also have integration flexibility. So, as you've built out third-party integrations within your on-premise environments, often they're not available when you move to a cloud CCaaS platform. And with a BYOC approach, you can still maintain those integrations. You also have a direct line for troubleshooting. You're working with the source of the majority of the issues, where that's the carrier. And in Bandwidth's case, we have fantastic support that's available that helps you to troubleshoot and uncover what those issues are and help you resolve and get your systems back up and running. And then you have the increased return on investment. As you scale, as your volumes increase, often with the BYOC approach, pricing can become a lot better. So Lauren, what would you recommend our enterprise customers to do?
Yep. Go with a guide. A little tongue in cheek, of course, but we've put together a lot of resources. I'm going to highlight some of the details. Some of the highlights here. We've got many, many more detailed guides on our website and other assets that we can share. But I think if I were to simplify it down to four things, it can plan and execute, prepare for your vision. The first thing you got to do is you got to audit what you have. This is sometimes the hardest part of the process, and we'll talk about some various things to consider when auditing your infrastructure. You got to decide, do you want an SEC in this game or not? Do you want infrastructure in this game or not, right? That's another big piece of what we're trying to do. The third thing is you got to think about 911, especially in the United States. Globally, 911 is going to start evolving pretty soon, but it is still what we would expect, a phone number to an address, the legacy environment that we're used to thinking about. But within the United States, we've got very specific regulations around 911, Response Act carries law, that have very unique implications for the UCaaS platform. So I'll go into that a little bit in a minute. And then make sure you build something that's not like lobbing the ball over the tennis court and there's nobody there to hit it back, right? You want to be able, if your migration doesn't go smoothly, to toggle back and forth and make sure that you've got something that is really great before you finally deconstruct and decommission your previous UCaaS or CCaaS system. So now a little bit more on number one, and this is not an exhaustive checklist. This is an extra from the things you got on our website, which would be great. If you're interested in more, please hit that up. The first thing is, do all your users have all the licenses for the platform where you're going, right? So if you're going to Microsoft Teams, do they have the E1, E5? If they're going to Genesis, for an example, do you have the CX licenses? make sure you've got those all purchased and provisioned within the software platform that you're going to be moving toward, the UCaaS or UCaaS platform that you're going to be moving towards. If you are going to keep a session border controller in the call flow in some way, and the number of companies do still want to do this for a variety of reasons, although those reasons are starting to shrink over time. And that's really been a difference in the market that's been dramatic over the past 5 years. It's just 5 years ago, everybody had an FCC, they were keeping it, they were doing it, and now nobody wants them. They want to outsource that capability. They don't want to have to deal with any infrastructure in that call flow. And we support pretty much every range of options that you're interested in, but it is important. One thing we see go on all the time is, you get the FQDN, you get the cert for the FQDN, and then the cert expires. And then we get a phone call because all the calls aren't working, and it's really as simple as the fact that the cert expired. There's all these little administrative things that comes with managing this that you have to kind of keep up with, like making sure the software gets upgraded, because as these cloud platforms upgrade their software, you're going to need to keep your infrastructure upgraded in line with that. Next thing, there's an inventory of your users and phone numbers. Boy, is this a pain for people who have tens of thousands of people. But I always say, I don't know, my grandmother always said, you can eat out of one bite at a time. I actually believe this is completely true. Inventory, your system, you just kind of got to fly through it. But once you got it, it's an invaluable resource in the migration process. The thing with mapping your IVR call flows, making sure you've got all the audio files, making sure you understand how it works, especially if you have systems that have evolved over time. Sometimes that can be really tricky, but a good audit with an inventory of your files, your audio file, is really going to make this go really fast if you can get that laid out. And then the last piece is that, again, if you are keeping infrastructure in the call flow, you want to map out that network topology. You're going to want to make sure you understand your subnet while it's actually going ports and switches. This is important for some of the UCaaS and UCaaS platforms that require you to actually have this information uploaded, largely for emergency services perspective. Sometimes it's just to verify your domain, but other times it's for emergency services. So there's a lot of words and there's a lot more to it, but at a high level, these are the things that if people do this really well, then it's like a deep sigh, maybe start doing this, it makes it a lot easier. The next thing, and I think I've touched on this a bit, so I won't belabor it, but you just have to decide, do you want to be in the business of managing this infrastructure or not? There's advantages to both. Obviously, if you've got a lot of in-house expertise, if the CapEx model is more appealing, if you need some control or if there's places you need to go that you just cannot get cloud coverage from, this can be a really great option. There's also a middle option where a company like Bandwidth will manage that session border controller for you. This was a pretty popular option, but really it was just the transition step to what we're really seeing customers do the most now, which is what's called a no SBT option. And in this case, a call is going directly from the cloud platform to Bandwidth to the PSTN, and we've built those interconnections into those cloud platforms so that you don't have to. And then we manage all of the certification and upgrades that are required to keep those interconnections current and trouble-free. Next up, our old friend, emergency services. So I've done so many webinars on this subject, and just when I think the topic is dead and I can't talk about it anymore, somebody asked me a question about it. So I think in summary, what I would say is if you have a UCaaS and CCaaS platform in the United States and you're going to be able to make outbound calls, you have to be able to make those outbound calls terminate to an emergency services provider. And what makes this even more confusing is every one of these platform providers does this differently. So Genesis is not the same as Five9, is not the same as Cisco, is not the same as Teams. So what we've tried to do is package together a bunch of solutions for emergency services that will help you navigate all of these platforms. There's a whole lot of detail I could go into, but a couple of key things you want to make sure you do is you need to make sure it's working. You need to make sure you've configured your users properly. We have a 933 service. That means you don't have to bug a 911 certain team and the PSAP every time you're trying to test it. That's something you definitely don't want to do. Making a bunch of emergency test calls to PSAP without warning them or do it a lot because it just ties up their resources, which makes sense. Another thing is, I know we're here to mostly talk about the contact center, but it's hard to talk about contact centers without talking about Teams, because so many of our customers are Genesis plus Teams, or, Five9 plus Teams, Cisco plus Teams. So when we look at that, we need to make sure that we understand with Microsoft specifically, there's actually only 3 of us in the US who are certified to provide emergency services for Microsoft. So Microsoft has a very specific and unique program that requires anybody providing that service to get a special level of a certification above and beyond just the normal certifications you might have to do for a session border control or something like that. So, and I see some questions might be popping in. If it's okay, I'm going to keep those to the end, but we will get to all of them, we promise. And last but not least, how you group your employees is definitely something to think about. So when you're doing these migrations, so you can do it departmentally. With call centers, you might want to do it by location. You can do it by shift. You can do it by knowledge source. You can do it by where they physically are. You can do it by system. So you do your Teams first, your Genesis next, your, whatever you're going to be doing, your Five9, just so you can do them in those cohorts. But every business seems to have some logical construct that works for them. And figuring out what that is, and then grouping all of your employees and phone numbers once you've done that inventory into that group is going to make this a lot easier. A lot of it, because anytime you do a new system, it's the training of the people, right? It's not just moving the telecom, it's making sure that everybody is trained and everybody knows what to do. All right, I've been talking a lot. I kind of feel like I should take a breath, but hold on. I'll get through a couple more slides and then we'll transition it over. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about migrating itself. So this is the actual act of, I've made a decision, I've done my inventory, now I'm ready to press go. What does that look like? And like bandwidth, we think about this in 3 steps. First is the connection, second is the number porting, third is the migration between platforms. And I'll go into a little detail here, if my mouse will obey. Okay, there we go. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the connection. And when we do a migration for our customers, we always do something we call building a parallel footprint first. What we want to do is connect to your existing infrastructure represented at the bottom of this diagram, whatever your current call center platform is, or your current PBX, if you're talking UC. We want to build our SIP trunk into that first. Nothing's happening on that SIP trunk yet, but it's sitting there and it's plugged into your old equipment. And there's a reason for this as we go forward. The next thing we're going to do is what we call the no interruption port. So this is where your system is fully your old system, but we're going to port the numbers over to bandwidth. And I'm going to go into some detail about how easy that is and how much the night is not dark and full of terror supporting. A lot of people will just hear the word port and they go, oh gosh, no, please, anything but that. But I promise, it's really not a bad thing. It's really very easy with that. Once your numbers are ported, then we migrate to your new system. And why do we do it in this order? Because we will have built, our systems have something called a location, which you can think of as a bucket for numbers. And we place all of your numbers in a bucket initially that goes to your old system, and then we build another bucket for your new system. And when we do that, you're able to use our software in real time to just migrate numbers between them. So you can move a number from your old system to a new system, and if anything's gone wrong, if your IDR isn't quite working like you thought, if there's some hiccup, you immediately in real time can pull it back. It's just going to be doing what it always did before. This takes a lot of risk out of it. Again, it's not like you're like hitting a ball over a tennis court and just going, geez, I hope this works. Like, I hope there's somebody there to hit it back. I hope everything's okay. It takes a lot of that uncertainty out of the migration process. So again, build a SIP trunk, port the numbers, migrate to the cloud. So a little bit about what porting looks like with bandwidth. I always love to show this because it feels like an esoteric concept. And when I show it, hopefully that it's like a prove this thing where it proves that this really is all that easy. So the first thing we always do when we port numbers is we check for the portability of the number, because different carriers, there's old number types, there's all kinds of nonsense sometimes they have to clean up. And we absolutely can do that. But we like to know that right up the bat. So in this particular example, you can see I'm entering in my phone number and I'm literally clicking continue. Next thing I do is I fill out some information. I fill out my customer name, who I am, the name that I have on the account that I'm porting from, and any other information about that account goes in here. Next up, I add in the address, the billing address. Using carriers are going to want to know all this information. Next up, I have to attach an LOA. So that's the final that, and by the way, every carrier that you deal with, this does it slightly differently. And we try to abstract that for you so it's super simple. So if you do this, you follow these instructions, and 90+% of all ports still fall out. We call it falling out when a port doesn't go through right away. And obviously we have teams of people. We literally have floors of people who do nothing but manage porting and dealing with carriers and trying to make this a great process for you if anything goes wrong. And then we have the ability to do bulk ports. So you don't have to obviously port one by one. You can upload a bunch of numbers. You check them all at once. That's typically when you have cohorts. When you're talking about these cohorts, we load up a cohort of numbers, and this is where we do the porting. And then we schedule it. I think this is the coolest part. I'm a little bit of a software nerd, but we have software built in here that literally will only show you the first available port date for a number. So today is the 8th, and we actually updated these slides. So you're trying to port the number that we just showed. The earliest date for that leaving carrier is on Thursday the 13th at 2 o'clock. But you can actually use this little flag ruler in the middle of the page to actually schedule exactly when you want that port to happen. There's some really great reasons for this. Nobody wants to work weekends and be like, oh, I only want to port by work night, or you don't want to work at 8 o'clock at night. None of us want to do that. So we let you schedule a port. Maybe you do want office after office hours. Maybe you want it 5:30, but you can be home for them by 6, you promise. So it's very, very easy to schedule a port. And then what we also will do is this is all self-service. You can do this without ever talking to a family person. However, for large value toll-free numbers, it is very common for our customers to say, hey, I'd like to have my customer service rep on the line with me as I do this port, just to make sure in case anything goes wrong, especially for those really high value toll-free numbers, the ones you can name off from all the ads. A lot of those abandoned customers, and when we do those ports, we really like to make sure that there's somebody online in case anything goes wrong. And then last but not least, you review it and hit submit. And it's really that easy. So hopefully, if you've ever had any trepidation about porting, hopefully this will allay those fears. And hopefully this process makes sense. And it's all software driven and really, really easy. So I'm going to take a deep breath. I'll talk a quick second. And Diana, also, I know you've got a million examples of this exact same thing too, but here's a customer testimonial. Sometimes they speak louder than all the words that we talk about in these webinars. But it was a real customer that we had. They were dealing with 15 locations globally. They had 9 carriers. And 9 carriers mean 9 logins, 9 portals, 9 bills, 9 customer service representatives to call. It's a lot of operational overhead to manage, which is one of the things that we really try to eliminate for you. And they consolidated all of their services with us. And the migration process was stress-free. And that is exactly what we want you to think about. When you think about migrating, you start to get a little anxious. We don't want that for you. We want it to be stress-free. So I don't know, Diane, I know you've seen a million of these too.
Yeah, but I have some questions for you, Lauren. So right, you think about this is like a global deployment, right? In 15 locations, in 15 different countries. Did it all get switched over on day one, or did they do a couple locations, and then see how that goes? And then I guess, how did that deployment look in terms of, turning everyone over?
Yeah. First of all, we always do test numbers. So what a typical thing that'll happen is we'll set up the trunking, like I said. Usually we'll buy a number or two off the portal. We have numbers available in all of our countries that you can purchase and activate in real time, so it's super easy. And we'll get a couple test numbers and we'll make sure the process works. That's typically what people want to do. That usually takes like 15 minutes. But it is an important step because again, you want to make sure this is going to work before you migrate a bunch of stuff over. So then what customers typically will do, especially if you got geographies, that is a very natural way to group numbers reporting, especially because some global carriers take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even 1 or 2 or a month. It's misery. We hate it. But we're beholden to whatever their intervals are. So we're always trying to figure out ways to help you group them so that you do them in logical groups. So, in the United States, things tend to happen pretty quickly, with the exception of a few, some of the ILECs, but the major carriers that most people use, those ports are pretty quick, sometimes almost in real time. Toll-free numbers have a slightly different interval than DIDs, but globally, all the different number types, people will often group them in that way.
And I know you guys have a global team, right? You have that here on the slide. But in a migration like this, right, where you are spanning multiple countries, do you actually have folks on site or at least in those countries to kind of help and ease that migration? Because it can be a little worrisome, right? You don't want lines to go down, numbers to go down when you flip that switch, especially if it's in a country that handles a lot of call center traffic.
Yeah. So we do. We have people in each region that we operate in that are available, to cover the time zones that we need. And we've got 24-hour support from our porting team. So that's something that we're able to, and like I said, with the big major ports, usually we will set a time and have whoever is you are assigned as a customer an onboarding specialist. You will have their phone number, access to them whenever you need them. Typically a part of the process is them being, especially with high value numbers, being on the phone with you as these things go through, just to make sure there's no issues. So we're very high touch in that way.
Great. This is a great example. This is, it's always, you can read and you can hear all the things, but, really looking at a real life situation like DocuSign, you see, this is not just one site and, and it's a big global deployment.
Cool. All righty.
All right, brilliant. So just zooming out from a minute, Lawrence talked a lot about the practical side of things, how you port numbers, how you bring them over, but the migration process is always complicated, and it's wise to think ahead, thinking beyond a single platform migration and thinking bigger in terms of what you're able to achieve. So when we speak to our enterprise customers, they almost always are never looking at just doing a one-to-one migration. It's often a one-to-many migration or a many-to-many migration. A one-to-one migration might be, taking your on-prem setup, moving it to the cloud, for example, using a Genesis contact center. But enterprises are more complicated than that. They have more complicated setups, and it's not just their CCaaS, often the UCaaS is involved as well. So fantastic example is DocuSign, who we've just talked about. And now that they have migrated their contact center platforms, they're talking to us about a number of other capabilities that we have available, which I'll go into in a bit more detail. But Diane, it'll be great to hear from you in terms of customers that are moving to the cloud in their migration story. Like what is important for them? What are the trends that they're looking at?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to go to the next slide to kind of speak to that. So in that same study that I had showed a little bit earlier, where we talked about the network transformation or the customer experience transformation, and we talked about foundational areas. And we asked them, right, we had the survey, this was a global survey, right? So we had respondents from across the globe. We really wanted to understand what was the must-haves, right? And what was maybe not necessary in terms of network functions. And you can see here, I had summarized a few of these, right, around security and workflows, but this gives you a little bit more detail that, at the end of the day, security and fraud are so important, right? Those are kind of must-haves for more than half of the companies out there. It's just critical. It's kind of a non-starter to be working with a carrier who's going to block the fraudulent calls, who then is also going to be able to have automated workflows that are stored in the carrier network, and it can be pointed to any of the CCaaS providers, right? Another important piece, I'm not going to go through all of those. It would be the insights and feedback, right? So that's the when you're going out and you're doing kind of the voice of the customer, right? After you've had an interaction with them, they want them to be stored. They want those to be centrally stored, and be able to be accessed from a kind of a common set of data. but within the carrier. So I think these are, some really important kind of network functions that are coming from the carriers rather than the CCAS providers themselves. And when we look to a company like Bandwidth to help provide some of these capabilities, and and definitely with more than half of our respondents, that they're really critical items.
Brilliant. So we often find that simplicity is the best path forward. As an enterprise, considering your best-in-class integrations across, your contact center, your UC platform, voice, messaging, and whether you're using Genesys or Five9 or Cisco or Microsoft Teams or any platform that's out there today, I think Bandwidth gives you the freedom to be able to choose the provider that fits your needs, and we allow you to easily change providers as those needs evolve. We have a number of enterprise clients today who have made that transition from on-prem to cloud, potentially during COVID, for example, and now they're looking at that cloud to cloud migration. So, maybe their contact center doesn't fit the needs of what they're trying to achieve, and now they want to move to a new contact center. That's something that Bandwidth is able to power and help our customers with. So one of the ways that we do that is through our Visual Builder. So our Visual Builder makes it really easy for you to be able to construct simple call flows using those best-in-class integrations. So we've got a demo here that I'll run everyone through. What you'll see here is the Visual Builder platform. So first you can pick a single number or a location. As Lauren mentioned, that's sort of your bucket of numbers. And then you can layer in, those best-in-class integrations like call verification, which allows you to identify fraudulent calls using our API. And then we've got advanced routing capabilities that allow you as the enterprise to, really easily put together core routing logic based on percentages across multiple endpoints. And then we've got best-in-class AI platforms, the likes of Cognigy or Google Dialogflow that can be integrated ahead of the contact center. So we've got built-in text-to-speech, speech-to-text conversion that automatically powers those NLU engines within their conversational AI platforms. Now, the goal is always to try and contain the call within the AI platform, but if that's not possible, that's where your unbundled telecommunication comes in. We've got those BYOC integrations, and as you can see here, I've got a Genesys contact center, for example, and a pin drop integration, which gives me that voice biometrics on that call as well. So this can all be constructed really simply using a Visual Builder. You don't need any coding experience. You don't need communications experience to put together these call flows using the Bandwidth platform. So in terms of the Visual Builder, so it's a part of the Bandwidth Maestro platform, but the Bandwidth Maestro platform is a lot more than that. It's a cloud-based platform that allows enterprises to connect, create, and compose communication workflows with ultimate simplicity. And we've got best-in-class integrations, the likes of Cognigy and Google Dialogflow from an AI perspective, CCAS integrations that we've talked about, like Genesys, Five9, and WebEx. And then we've got those voice biometric providers, the likes of Pindrop, that really allow you to put together all of these flows. So Dan, if there's anything else that you'd like to add here, and then I'll hand over to Eric for the Q&A section as well.
Sorry, I just had myself on mute for a bit. No, I think one of the big takeaways when we think about Maestro and you think about a lot of the pre-built integrations is that, well, first of all, there are some of these core platforms that we're talking about, right? I know today we've mentioned Teams, we've mentioned Genesys and WebEx, Cisco and all the core platforms. But a lot of times some of these are working in conjunction with each other, right? And so to be able to get up and it's not always just we're not always just working with one vendor, right? And then there's a lot of enhanced applications that kind of layer on top of these. And so it's often, it's not a simple one and done, right? And so to be able to work with, multiple vendors in an environment like that Bandwidth is creating with Maestro is really important is not even the right word. It's really, to be able to really create some of that seamlessness for companies is an advantage for sure.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that the needs of the enterprise evolve as well as time progresses. They're looking at new tools, they're looking at new capabilities. AI, for example, is the buzz of the last few months, and everyone's looking at how they can integrate that as part of their strategy. And when you're in the cloud and using a provider like Bandwidth, so much more easier for you to be able to bring in those best-in-class tools that you have identified out in the market and how you can work with them.
Yep.
So that's the power and capability that Maestro is able to provide you with.
Yeah. And also, we did touch briefly on fraud and security, and I would bring that up. You mentioned we have a call verification API and a call verification integration with providers like Pindrop for biometric authentication. These are things that are increasingly critical with contact centers because so much time and energy is wasted, not only at agent time, but if you're a bank and you've got a call center, or if you're a business, you've got a call center. If you don't authenticate the person at the other end, you're likely to have a security breach that can cost millions upon millions of dollars. These are big numbers that fraud is causing enterprises. So one of the things that we've tried to do is say, look, there are so many great technologies now. There's going to be even more really cool technology coming up. And as long as we can integrate them and get them into your call flow, which is really what we're doing here with Maestro, and in such an easy way, like Tim's demo, it's so cool what that does. Drag and drop, and you're mapping call flows. It's that easy. I think it's something that will be increasingly important as time goes on. It's a major theme that we see. We almost have no conversation today about contact centers where we're not talking about fraud.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you look at call verification, for example, it's a really simple API, and you're instantly able to get back a fraud score that you can then inject into any of your flows. So if you want to pass that information through to your agent in the contact center, or you choose to maybe integrate that within your conversational AI platform, that's information that you can use to then make a smart routing decision. So all of those capabilities just provide a lot of flexibility for contact centers, for enterprises using contact centers.
Okay.
Brilliant. So I'll hand over to Eric for Q&A now.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Pritam, and thanks Lauren and Diane also for great presentations and a lot of great information. I'll remind everybody, please also, while we're going through Q&A, if you get a chance, please take the feedback survey, give us your feedback on this event, and of course you can use the Q&A window to send us your questions. I want to start actually with we have a question that's come in that maybe just taking a step back and just making sure everybody's kind of oriented and has a sense of what we're talking about when we're talking about cloud and the issues. This person's asking about the term perceived cost savings that was used, and they're asking, is that because this is hype, or is there actually cost savings? And wonder, Diane, if you maybe just real quick could kind of give us your sense from the studies that you've made of where enterprises find themselves on this issue of cost savings going to the cloud.
Yeah, and that was from one of my slides that I presented, that perceived cost savings as a trigger. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, when we have looked at all the different elements of a cost for running, whether it be CCaaS, UCaaS, on-prem, right, or, across the spectrum, they tend to come out relatively flat, right? In some cases, it depends on your time length of measurement, right? So if you're looking at a 1 year or 2 year, well, then yeah, that move to the cloud could potentially drive up near-term costs, right? Because your costs in those couple of years could be higher in the migration, whereas maybe you had your existing contact center platform was amortized. You're paying kind of minimal maintenance and support on that to a vendor, and then obviously you had staff that was managing it, and that's and that's where sometimes the it's the dollar or cents, but when you dig into it longer term, and you have to also take into account a lot of different factors that are not just the cost of the platform, but the management and things like that, that often, there is this assumption that moving to kind of an as a service, cloud-based service is going to drive, significant cost savings. But really what you're doing is you're shifting from kind of more of a CapEx spending to an OpEx spending. So over time, it kind of equals out, but it's just a different way of thinking about it. And so, obviously OpEx is very different, than a CapEx.
And another thing that people, I think I'd add on, Diane, because that is exactly what we see too. But another thing that's harder to quantify is the customer experience.
Yeah.
Because with some of these new technology, you have a much better way of creating a customer call flow that is a much better experience than going through it an annoyingly complex IVR before you get put on hold. And, there's that whole Saturday night skits about what that customer experience looks like, right? And I think about it, and I think, I had an experience recently where I went to a website and I was Google searching insurance coverage that I had, and I got to the website of the company, and then they sell tons of different kinds of insurance, right? So then I got to the insurance that I was looking for my homeowner's policy, not my auto. So I went and found my homeowner's policy on that page, and they said, click here to call. And I clicked there to call, and I bypassed every IDR, and I went directly to an agent who was a specialist in homeowners insurance. I didn't have to go to press 1 for auto, press 2 for homeowner, press 3 for, like, oh my God, really, like 15 prompts later, I'm like, oh, it's my jewelry waiver or whatever, So I think there's things, and then if you can think about, like a score where you're verifying who that person is, you can have a routing to an agent that doesn't have to ask you 100,000 different questions to verify who you are. Oh, but if I'm calling from my mother's phone and it's not the phone they're used to seeing me call from, that might route me to an agent or a script, same agent, maybe a different script that asks me a different series of questions. So there's this whole burgeoning, like, creative universe, it's like painting new flows with, it's kind of cool. You get to reimagine the whole universe, and it's a much better universe from a customer experience. So while maybe the dollars don't always be like, oh, this is saving me 75% of my car insurance, right? It's not that. But this will get so much more customer loyalty, and there is a real tangible benefit to that. So I don't know. I just add that in because those are some real experiences that I've had and that we've seen.
Yeah, for sure. Moving to the cloud opens up a whole new set of digital channels and different ways of, Lauren, as you mentioned, right, servicing that customer in different ways that could be a lot of cost savings to you, right, offloading tasks in different ways.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks very much for that. And here's another question, a very kind of specific, detailed migration question. We're in the process of migrating our contact center platform with agents in 4 different countries with multiple network providers. What would be your top recommendation for collapsing all of this into a single CCaaS platform with a single network provider to ensure a smooth transition? Maybe Lauren or Pritam, you want to?
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think we actually covered a lot of that in the migration journey that I went through. But it's definitely a situation where you want to, again, the 4 steps, that's what you've got. Make sure you've got licenses and everybody, and you've got the new platform set up where you're going to go, and then group all of your users and your locations into cohorts, and then we start doing the migration process that I talked about. So first off, parallel SIP trunks into each one of your platforms that we're going to be migrating from, and then do the no problem ports, and then do the migration so that you can migrate forward and back. But those audits and those inventories up front are really important. They're things that, can be difficult, challenging, hard to, but once they're done, they make the rest of it just go like clockwork, super easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you're looking at those 4 different countries and creating those cohorts, even within those countries itself, are there specific office locations or buildings or maybe floors or departments that you want to move over first as part of that cloud migration? I think that, that inventory management is really a crucial step in that journey to identifying who you want to move over first and when, so you can really schedule that switch. And it's not flicking a switch and hoping that it works. You've actually planned it. You've got a plan of action in place to really execute against.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts?
No, I think, no, I mean, they covered that. I don't think I have anything additional.
Okay. All right. Thanks. A question about the partner ecosystem that you have. You are working with a number of CCaaS providers. What do I do if the company that I'm looking at isn't on that list? Can you work with other CCaaS platforms? Are you going to expand this? Or what's likely?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can take that one. So in terms of bandwidth strategy, as Lauren mentioned earlier on in the as well, we're powering 100% of the Gartner Magic Quadrant leaders for CCaaS and UCaaS. So, where those programs have formal BYOCs, you'll invariably find them as part of Maestro. But if that's not the case, Bandwidth still has a working relationship with all of these providers. So based on the needs of the enterprise and the complexity behind that, that's definitely a scenario where they can come and speak to us and we can figure out what the best solution is. There's a number of workarounds that we can put in place to make that work, and we have done for a number of customers already. So, there's obviously some CCaaS platforms that are more closed ecosystems versus ones that are more open or moving towards a more open ecosystem. But Bandwidth works with all of these providers. So come and speak to us and we can help you on that journey and figure out the best way to be able to do that. Lauren, if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And we do have definite scenarios where folks have come to us and said, but I really want to use X, and, if that's possible. And many times we can make something work. But there's a lot of different technical ways we could solve those problems. So, yeah, completely agree.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I want to ask about security. I mean, it was really interesting. Diane, you mentioned, you showed some of your research showing the importance of security. And Lauren, you said that almost all of your conversations involving contact center talk about security. Maybe this was a false impression of mine, but it seems like that's a fairly new level of interest in security on the sort of communication side of things, and issues around these issues have been kind of floating around. But is it fairly recent that the companies are really prioritizing that and just making it a sort of must-have?
I'll take that first. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's probably something we all have something to add on. I was going to say, I think it's always been there. I think it is more so because the penalties are so severe, and with hacking, with privacy laws in Europe and the United States, with HIPAA, healthcare privacy, with all of these different regulations, the penalties for not getting it right are really big. And with financial services, the penalties for people stealing money from people's accounts is really big. So when you're dealing with call centers and you're dealing with authenticated people, it is really, really critical to know who they are. And so I do think we see it more. I think it's always been there. I think everybody always worries about it. What's different now is that instead of just asking people a bunch of security questions, we have technology that can actually help take that to another level. So, stir shaken with the piece. We implemented that a couple of years ago. Didn't get everything, didn't solve all the world hunger. I don't think we was ever going to. And now with voice by authentication, with looking at information about the caller, about their phone, about where they're calling from. All of this information we can piece together now and use that as an extra level to actually understand who that person is. So yeah, I would say it's kind of both. It feels more urgent, I would say. If it was always there, it feels more urgent. Yeah, and Diane, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, no, I was gonna kind of echo exactly what you said. It's like it's actually been important for a long time. It's especially on the voice world, right? When we're talking about SIP, it doesn't maybe get discussed as much, right? But it is. I mean, gosh, and not all the cases of fraud and security breaches come to light, right? Because many companies don't want the world to know, right? This isn't like setting. This isn't as if the power grid went down, right? But it will cripple companies, right? If they have denial of service attacks, if they, if there's fraudulent behavior, I mean, it could absolutely take down a critical part of, your customer contact center, your call center platform is pretty critical, right? If if it goes down and something happens and your customers can't get through. So, and there are absolutely examples of this happening, especially, we're talking about IP here, right? And IP is not, there's definitely ways to tunnel in and wreak havoc for a company.
All right. On that cheery note, I think we're just about out of time. I want to thank, first of all, of course, everybody in the audience for joining us today. Thanks to Bandwidth for sponsoring the webinar, and of course, Lauren Brockman, Pritam Roy, and Diane Myers for lending your expertise and giving us this great discussion and conversation about sort of the next level to take your cloud migration for your contact centers. Within the next 24 hours, you'll get a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to listen to the event to go ahead and share that with them and encourage them to listen in. This webinar is copyrighted by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Enterprise Connect and Bandwidth, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. So on behalf of our guests, I'm Eric Kraft. Thanks for your time and have a great day.